Hi, I'm Kristen. Welcome to the first video in the Scrap Fabric Love Scrap Buster sew along. So this is the first time I've ever run a sew along, so be patient with me, but it's going to be, if you didn't hear about it in the announcement video, it's going to be a series of 4 videos. It'll be 4 weeks. It's meant to be no stress. You can make 1 block, you can make 20 blocks. There's going to be options for all sorts of sizes of quilts and projects so that you're not just adding to your orphan block pile and you actually get something finished. And I'm asking you not to buy any fabric. So I'm asking you to basically use your scraps to start off with. And then if you really find yourself stuck and you want to make more blocks and you don't have enough scraps, well, that would be amazing. But if you got to that point, then shop from your stash, essentially. So that's the idea. So we're not buying anything and we're not putting any pressure on ourselves to make a certain size of quilt. So behind me is the block. It's like a plus sign quilt block, or some people, I think, call it a Swiss cross block with the colors I've chosen. You can see why that might be. But those were my test blocks. I did them with some old jeans and some white and red fabric. And I will use those somewhere else, and I'll probably, hopefully finish that, she says, during, or get some way through it during the sew along, so I can show you that as well. But the one that I'm going to be sewing along with you is the one with the sort of scrappy black background and the bright colored centers. So I'm going to show you kind of what we're going to cover on the sew along, and I'm going to go through how to make the block in this video. And it's what I'm calling a mix and match blocks. So the center cross, we can swap out with different types of scraps depending on what you have and how you store them. So I have a lot of crumb blocks. And then I have a lot of sort of oddly shaped scraps where I've like just cut off a little bit for some foundation paper piecing pattern or something like this. And I just have some random scraggle of fabric. But I know a lot of you do cut your fabric down to size, and that 2.5-inch squares are fairly popular for that. So there's an option for you to use that for the center cross as well. So I'm hoping no matter what state your scraps are in, that you should be able to pretty easily pick them up and just start making these easy blocks. I think I'll start with how you put the block together, and then if you're still with me, you can, I'll then tell you kind of how we're gonna progress through the weeks and all of that stuff. Okay, let's get started. So the block is essentially a 9-patch, and every piece of fabric that you use to make up that block could be a different fabric, so you should be able to use lots of different scraps. The center of the cross, you can mix and match. So you can use just plain old scraps that you cut to the sizes I'm going to give you in a minute, or you can use crumb blocks that you've already pieced, or you can use 2.5-inch squares. So I'm hoping you'll have one of those 3. You can also mix and match, so you don't have to use all crumb blocks or all 2.5 squares. I'm doing a bit more of this with probably more of an emphasis on the crumb blocks because I already had a lot of those pieced. If you've seen my channel before, you might know that I color sort my scraps, and so that's why the examples are kind of all pinks or all oranges. But if you don't do that, or you don't like that look, you can absolutely go random with this. You just have to pay attention to the contrast between the cross and the background. And I'm also going to talk about ways to use different colors of background in a future video because you might not have enough scraps to do all one color for the background of your whole quilt. So I'm planning to use a scrappy black background and some bright colored crumbs and other pieces for the center. I'm just sort of cycling through the layout for a lap quilt with the different centers so you can get an idea of how they might look. And this is kind of the baby quilt version with totally mixed up blocks, which is more like the blocks I'm going to be making. So here are the measurements that make up the 9-patch. If you're making either the crumb blocks or just piecing from scraps, then you're only going to have to cut 2 sizes: 4.5-inch squares and 2.5 by 4.5-inch rectangles. If you're using your 2.5-inch squares, then all you're doing is replacing that center block with a 4-patch and 4 of the 8 rectangles with 2 of your 2.5-inch squares. You can absolutely use whatever ruler you like to cut these, but I did use 3 Accuquilt dies specifically that came in my 8-inch cube. So if you have the Accuquilt system and you want to know what dies I used, there are links in the description as well as in the blog post. So this one Don't worry about that indent is from me cutting too many things on at one time. Don't worry about that. So this one is for the center of the block and the 4 corners. And this one is for the 4 other patches in the 9 patch that have the 2 rectangles. So this is what I've been using to cut not only the central scraps, the crumb blocks, but also the background fabric as well. So, but I'm going to show you what I'm doing for the crumb blocks. Okay, I do have 2 videos about making crumb blocks. So if you want to use your crumbs, and when I say crumbs, I'm talking about this kind of thing. So they could be a bit of a strip. They could be a tiny wee funny shaped crumb. Could be anything, right? That's what I'm talking about. And so I basically just sew those all together, trim straight edges until it makes the size of the block. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that makes no sense, then go look at those 2 videos. And if you do have questions about that, let me know. I'm happy to film another kind of crumb block tutorial if the ones I've done are not clear, because they were a while ago. So just let me know if you're like, nope, it doesn't do it for me, and then I'll do another one. But I'm assuming that if you're interested in the crumb block version, that you maybe already make crumb blocks or whatever. But so if that's the case, all I'm doing is trying to make it big enough. Where is my die? Here, for my 4.5 inch square. So here I am. I'm gonna line it up along the edge, and obviously this could be a ruler if you don't have the Accuquilt die. And then I'm gonna go, what do I need? Where do I need to add something to finish that off? And what do I have? So I've got this left over. So I know I don't need to sew something all the way to the whole edge. I just need to sew it along here. And then I can trim a 4.5 inch square, and then I will have this bit left to add to whatever, to that or that, to start me building up. Sorry, you can't see that. To start me building up another 4.5 inch square. And if I find I don't have enough crumbs to make all of the side rectangles, then I do have some 2.5 inch squares, so I might finish those up. I got them various places. Or I might use another bigger orange scrap that I have and just cut those side rectangles. So that's how I will make my crumbs stretch to fit the center of those blocks. Here's one. It's less of a crumb block, more of a log cabin thing, but it was made with crumbs that I can just, it already fits. I'm going to be trimming off some bits, but it already fits in the 4.5 inch square. So I can just cut one of those. Then I've got these 2, which are more sort of your traditional crumb blocks. This one with so these would be the easier type to make quickly if you already have things sort of cut in more squares and rectangles. That's a bit quicker. And then this is the kind I normally make. It's just got kind of random things are at all angles, and yeah, it ends up taking a bit longer. But anyway, so I'm gonna cut 2, where do I want to put this? Maybe here. So I'm going to cut 2 squares out of this to start with, and I'm just trying to line it up as close to the edge so I'm not cutting off awkward pieces that I can't then sew on to a new block, because I would prefer to, the bits that I'm cutting off, I would prefer to be rather sizable so that I can add it to another crumb block. Where's my mat? All right, here's my cutting mat. Right. And then there are 2 of my 4.5 inch center blocks for my quilt. Okay, so I will put those there, and then I've got this left over. Where's my scissors? So I'm obviously not going to use that tiny bit, but I will probably use the rest of this. So I'm going to cut this like this, and then I've got 2 other bits to add to another orange crumb block. That's my waist. And that. And then I'm going to cut this way. Right. And then I have the basis of, so I could probably make another block out of this and a few other orange pieces. Right. And then what have I got here? This is probably big enough to make a 4.5 inch square. Yep. So where do I want to put it? Like that? No, it's going to be like that. Okay, so that's going to be 1, And obviously you can do this with a ruler, right? And there's another fun crumb center for my block. And then I can probably use that one and that one, but not this tiny shreddy bit. And then that can also be the basis of another block. And then the other thing, so I can check with this. I don't know if either of these are big enough. So for the other part, now you have a choice, obviously, you know, it's mix and match. So if you don't want to do the rectangles out of crumbs as well, you don't want to sew a crumb to a crumb, you can do just a strip 2.5 by 4.5 inch, or you can use two 2.5 inch squares to make that up. But this is just about, yeah, it's just about the right width to be one of these. So I'm going to do that. That one is that big enough? No, that one's not quite big enough. Okay, so that one needs to be added to this one, so I can get one rectangle out of this. Can I get one out of, nope. What else have I got here? These are just some batiks that I sewed together. Like, I think they were somebody else's scraps, actually. So you see they're just like they're triangle offcuts and things. So this is like a one fabric crumb block, I guess. So I'll put that on there. And then we can add the leftovers to another quilt block. It's just to show you. Right. So then I've got two of these. Oh, that needs trimmed off. Two of these 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. So I'm starting to make my block here. Right? I just need two more and then the background, right? Definitely the crumb block version is the most time consuming, because if you already have 2.5 inch squares cut, or you just have random sizes of scraps that you're going to cut into the 4.5 inch squares and the 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles, you're going to be whipping through these blocks, no problem. So if you are piecing crumbs or crumb blocks and you're trying to use up all those crumbs, it'll be a little slower, but it's lots of fun. And this is the way that I've been kind of approaching it. Okay. So here is the center of my block. Let me move it up a bit. There. And here are the two crumb sides that I've cut. And then I've got two, in this instance, I have two just straight cut 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles here. But again, these could be crumb pieces, or these could be straight cut, and all of this could be 2.5 inch squares, right? We're mix and matching, right? And then I have some other 2.5 inch rectangles. So there's one, it's kind of a mottled black. This is a solid black. This is a black with a bit of a navy blue speckle. And this is a black with a bit of a blue, dark blue line on it. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but anyway, so they're all black. They all read black, but they are different fabrics. They're all different scraps, right? And then similarly, I've got my 4.5 inch square, so same size as the center of the block. And that is what is gonna make my 9 patch. So I'm gonna sew these two together, all of these, right? So I'm gonna sew those together first. And then I'm just assembling a 9 patch. So I will sew these together with a 1/4 inch seam and come back and show you. So here they are sewn together. Might be putting them in a different place here, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and so then it's just a case of sewing a 9 patch. So we're gonna sew. So the way I would do it would be to take them to the machine like this, and then come back and add these to the middle, and then add the rows together. But obviously you can do that in whatever order you like. It's just a simple 9 patch. And we're not worried about having perfect 1/4 inch seams or anything like that, because the whole block is going to get trimmed down to 12 inches at the end. So there's a little bit of wiggle room, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so there's two sewn together. There's the center and one side, and there's that, right? So now all we have to do is add these and then sew the rows together. And it's exactly the same whether or not you've got your 2.5 inch square or center, four patch center or plain center or whatever. Obviously the only difference is going to be if you're doing the 2.5 inch squares, you're going to have a few more seams to line up. Okay, there's our center. Here's the top or the bottom, whatever. And there we go. All right, so now we're just sewing rows together. Here you can nest your seams. That one needs to be pressed that way if I'm going to nest them. Or you could just press the seams open, which I often do as well. I kind of go back and forth. So if they could both be pressed open and you just join here. And I often put a wonder clip there just when I'm sewing those together. But if your points don't join perfectly, I'm not going to come and say anything about it. So, you know, you can use this as a practice if you're a beginner and try different ways of doing the seams, whether or not pressing open or nesting works better for you. If you don't know what nesting is, it's so where you have one seam going one way and one the other way, and then you just sort of nest them together so that when you sew and you open it up, the points meet. But I would often also, if you see my weight loss quilt, that was made with 5 inch squares, and I pressed all the seams open for that and joined it. So like you don't have to do it one way or the other. So I'm going to join these rows and show you the block before we trim it. So here's the finished block. So right now, this threads everywhere. This is what happens when you do use black. Anyway, right now, this is coming up for me a little bit shy of 12.5, and I'm going to trim it down to 12. So I've got one of these square rulers. You don't necessarily need that, but I find it useful just because I can line up the 8 and the 4 and see where the middle is, and then my 12 inch, see where I want. So I still want that to be the middle of the block, and then I'm trimming the 12 inch around it, if that makes sense. So first I'm going to trim on these two sides, and then I'm going to turn it around and find that 8 and 4 again. So, but this time I'm lining up the 12 inch on that corner, that edge I've already cut. Sorry, I'm not being clear. And then I've got the 8 and the 4, because the center is a 4 inch finished. And then there I am lined up, good. And so then there I am with my 12 inch finished block. So it's really not that much you're trimming off, but there's a bit of wiggle room. Okay, so that's the finished block. So here's some more example blocks, not in the color scheme that I showed you before. This is completely different. This is red and white. So this one is using the 2.5 inch squares. So the center is a 4 patch. The rest, the background's all the same cuts we used before. And then the sides, this rectangle is 2.5 inch squares. And so you just have, when you've pieced your 2.5 inch squares, so you just want to trim and check that that's still 2.5 by 4.5. It should be, but you might have to do some trimming. Okay, so that's the option with the 2.5 inch squares. See, that is sort of your background colors in the center, and the sort of more scrappy reds are the background, if that makes sense. So you can reverse it all, right? Then this one is just what I'm calling straight cut. I don't mean straight versus bias. I mean, there's no crumbs, there's no squares. It's just a 4.5 inch square, 2.5 by 4.5, 2.5, you know, the same. So all the squares are 4.5 unfinished, 4 inch finished. And all of the rectangles that make up these blocks are 2.5 by 4.5. So they're white background with red center. This one, I use denim for the background, and the rest is just straight cut. And then this one is the crumbs. So this is some low volume crumbs and a denim background. So you can see how the contrast helps, and you can also see you don't have to do all the same background fabric if you don't want to. I like to, as you can see, color coordinate things. So even with my test blocks, I was like, maybe I'll make something with this later. I've got a few more red crumb blocks that I think I am gonna make a few more blocks and make this into something bigger or add it to some other orphan blocks like I was talking about last time. But for example, so if I just lay out those 4, you know, even though, there you go. Can you see that? Let's back you up a bit. Right, even though they're made up of, you know, some of them are crumbs, some of them are 2.5-inch squares, some of them are just straight cut squares, I think it still sort of works together and it just makes a fun kind of scrappy quilt. So that's the idea. So I'm planning on finishing off my red crumbs and scraps and making a few more of these blocks. For the one I'm going to do for the sew along with you guys, I'm going to do more this black background, and I'm planning to do orange, pink, purple, and like a bright blue, a tealy kind of a blue. That's the plan, if I have enough scraps for the centers. So we'll see how that goes. So that's the block, but let's talk about what we're going to do in the subsequent weeks for the sew along. So next week, what we're going to cover is I'm going to show you different layouts depending on how many blocks you're going to do. So just as a rough indication, if you want to know ahead of time, you would need about 9 blocks for a baby quilt and 20 blocks plus some sort of scrappy sashing and borders for a lap quilt. And there's some more sizes already in the blog post, but I'm going to give you some more ideas in next week's video. We're also going to talk about options if you don't have enough background fabric to do all the same background for one whole quilt. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how you can use the quilt as you go option if you want to do that for this. And then also if there's questions in the comments or on email, I'm going to try and sort of consolidate those and answer those next week as well. In week 3, I'm going to show you how I'm putting my quilt top together for the version that I'm doing. And then we'll also talk about some scrappy backing fabric ideas because I do want you to finish this, whatever size yours is, and not just have some leftover blocks or another quilt top to fill up the cupboard. So with that in mind, in week 4, I'll hopefully be showing you my quilt on the Moxie, being quilted on the Moxie long arm. And then my friend Tom from the Colorblind Quilter, that's his YouTube channel name, he's going to be coming and giving us some ideas for quilting the quilt using a walking foot on your domestic machine. And then I'll also talk about some smaller projects. So if you didn't make a whole quilt and you just have a handful of blocks, I'll be showing you some other ways you can get those finished and do something with them so that you don't just have more orphan blocks, which none of us need. If you have any questions about the block or anything in this video, please do leave me a comment below. That is the fastest way to get me to reply to anything. But you can also email me if you don't want it to be public or something at hello@scrapfabriclove.com. And then kind of in the last instance, comment or message me on Instagram. My Instagram game is pretty non-existent, but I'm going to try and be on there a bit more during the sew along. And I've come up with a hashtag Scrap Fabric Love sew along, so you can use that if you're going to tag me in any photos. I would love to see your blocks in progress or anything that you've done for the sew along, and if you're okay with it, I'd be happy to share those also on the upcoming videos in the sew along. So do share that with me either by email or using a hashtag on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. So I hope you're as excited about me to get making these quilt blocks and get some of these scraps cleared. I'd love to hear in the comments if you're still with me. And I know a lot of you said in the announcement video you were going to join in, but you hadn't seen the block yet. So I'd love to know if you're still on board. And as this is my first time running a sew along, please do let me know if you have any suggestions for things that you would find helpful. Instead of a download or printable, what I've done is write up what I think is a really detailed blog post on scrapfabriclove.com, and I'll link to that in the description. And I'll be adding to that post as I put out the new videos, if you know what I mean. So you should be able to go there and find what you need if you need like a written version. But if that's not cutting it, or if there's something else that you need to more information or something that I've left out that you normally see in a sew along, let me know. I'm happy to kind of adjust as we go. So thanks so much for spending time with me today, and I hope I will see you for week 2 next Monday. Bye.